I work customs at Auckland Airport, and last month, I watched an American tourist unpack 12 boxes of Kraft mac and cheese from his checked luggage. Not clothes. Just pasta. My supervisor made him open every single box because we thought he was smuggling something inside. When he finally understood they were just confiscated, he went pale and said, "But it's comfort food. It's just cheese and noodles. What's the problem?" I had to explain that his comfort food contains yellow 5 and yellow 6, both banned here for cancer risks. He looked at me like I'd told him oxygen was illegal. The guy actually argued that if it was dangerous, America wouldn't sell it to kids. I didn't have the heart to tell him that America sells a lot of things to kids that we wouldn't let near a playground. Week before that, an American woman tried to bring in a party-sized bag of Skittles as a gift. She got upset when we flagged it, insisting they're sold in every store back home. I said yes, but they contain titanium dioxide, which Norway banned after studies linked it to DNA damage. She stared at me and said, "That's the stuff in paint, right? They wouldn't put that in candy." Right. I just nodded at the ingredients list. She went quiet for a solid minute, then muttered something about corporate America and walked off without the Skittles. I see this confusion every week. Americans don't realize that half their grocery store wouldn't pass inspection here. It's not their fault. It's just what they've been eating their whole lives. Last Tuesday, a family from Texas had a cooler full of American beef jerky. The father got defensive when I said it's treated with ractopamine, growth hormone banned in 160 countries, including ours. He said, "We're not trying to sneak drugs across the border. It's dried meat." I explained ractopamine increases heart rate and that most of the world won't import American pork or beef because of it. His teenage daughter looked up from her phone and asked why it's legal at home if it's that bad. Neither parent had an answer. I told them they could collect the jerky on their way out, or we'd dispose of it. They left it. The daughter kept looking back at the cooler like she'd just learned Santa wasn't real. I'm a grocery importer in Oslo, and an American distributor called me last year asking why I wouldn't stock his premium American snack line. Told him straight, "Your Fruit Loops contain 6 different artificial dyes that we've banned for triggering nerve cell issues in kids." He went silent, then said, "But they're shaped like toucans. Kids love them." I said kids also love not having developmental delays. He got irritated and claimed Europe was just being difficult because we're jealous of American innovation. I asked what was innovative about replacing real fruit with petroleum-based colorants. He said I was exaggerating, and that millions of American children eat them daily with no problems. I replied that Norway had different standards for what counts as a problem. He hung up. His company sent me an email later that week with European Market Adjustment Study in the subject line, asking what it would take to get shelf space. I haven't responded. I manage a restaurant supply warehouse in Vienna, and an American food rep tried to sell me prepackaged ground beef last spring. The pitch was all about convenience and cost savings. When I asked about the production process, he mentioned it's treated with ammonia gas to kill bacteria. I stopped him right there and said, "We don't import beef that's been chemically treated like that." He looked confused and said, "It's FDA approved. It's called pink slime, but it's totally safe." I told him we'd rather not serve our customers anything nicknamed slime, chemically treated or not. He laughed like I was joking and said every American burger chain uses it. I replied, "That explains why European locations reformulate their meat." He got defensive and insisted the ammonia dissipates during processing. I said if you need ammonia to make your beef safe, your hygiene standards aren't high enough. He left without closing the sale. I got 3 follow-up emails asking if I'd reconsider for bulk discount pricing. I forwarded them to my staff as a training example of what not to buy. I'm a supermarket manager in Melbourne, and an American supplier pitched me Coffee Mate Creamer last August. She went on about shelf stability and flavor variety. When I pointed out it contains partially hydrogenated oils, which are banned here for heart disease risks, she waved it off and said, "The US technically banned trans fats too, but Coffee Mate's been grandfathered in." I asked how something banned can still be sold. She explained that if a serving has less than half a gram, companies can label it as 0. So technically there are trans fats, but legally there aren't. I said that sounded like a loophole, not a safety standard. She insisted American consumers trust the brand and have been using it for decades. I told her decades of use doesn't mean decades of safety. She tried another angle, saying my customers would appreciate the convenience since our dairy creamers need refrigeration. I said our customers would appreciate not having heart attacks more. She packed up her samples and said we were missing out on a proven product. I watched her leave and thought about how proven means something very different depending on which side of the Pacific you're standing. My brother runs a small bakery in Snow Paulo, and last year an American flour supplier offered him potassium bromate as a dough enhancer. He asked what it does. The rep said it makes bread fluffier and helps it rise better. My brother asked about safety. The guy said it's used in most American sandwich bread and burger buns. My brother looked it up on his phone right there in the meeting and found studies linking it to cancer, kidney damage, and nervous system issues. The rep backtracked and said those were old studies, and that it's generally recognized as safe by the FDA. My brother asked if generally recognized was the same as definitely proven. The rep couldn't give a straight answer. My brother said he'd rather have denser bread than explain to customers why he's using a suspected carcinogen. The American got frustrated and said, European and Brazilian. Regulations were overly cautious and that plenty of countries still use it. My brother replied that plenty of countries also have higher cancer rates. The rep left his card and said to call if my brother changed his mind. The card went straight into the trash. My brother still talks about how the guy genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would turn down cheaper, fluffier bread just because of a little cancer risk. He uses that story to explain to apprentices why ingredient sourcing matters more than convenience. I'm a dairy inspector in Toronto, and last fall, an American milk company applied for import approval. Their paperwork listed RBGH and RBST as active hormones used to boost production. I flagged it immediately because we've banned those growth hormones since the 90s. The company rep called me personally and said, but it's just to make cows produce more milk. The hormone itself doesn't stay in the milk. I explained that the hormone causes mastitis in cows, which means pus and antibiotics end up in the milk supply. She sounded annoyed and said American milk has been hormone treated for decades and consumers are fine with it. I told her Canadian consumers aren't fine with it, and neither is our government. She asked what the science was behind our ban. I said we'd reviewed the same studies the EU and Japan used and reached the same conclusion. She tried to argue that the FDA found no difference between treated and untreated milk. I replied that our standards prioritize prevention over convenience. She said she'd submit a revised application using organic milk instead. I told her that would work. 3 weeks later, she emailed saying the cost difference made it economically unfeasible and withdrew the application. I wasn't surprised. It's cheaper to pump cows full of hormones than to raise them properly. I work in food compliance for the Singapore government, and an American soda company wanted to introduce Mountain Dew to our market last year. I reviewed the ingredients and immediately saw brominated vegetable oil. I sent back a rejection with a note explaining BVO is banned here because it contains bromine, the same element in flame retardants, and studies show it accumulates in body tissue causing memory loss and coordination issues. The company responded with a 40-page document arguing that the concentration is too low to cause harm and that Americans have been drinking it safely for decades. I replied that we don't wait for proof of harm before banning risky additives. They countered by saying PepsiCo removed BVO from Mountain Dew in 2020 anyway, so their reformulated version should qualify. I checked their current export formula and found they were still using the old recipe for Asian markets. When I pointed this out, they claimed it was an inventory clearance issue and that new batches would be BVO free. I asked when. They said, within 6 months. I told them to reapply once they had documentation proving the new formula. They never did. I later heard they were selling the old formula in markets with looser regulations. It's the same pattern with American food companies. They reformulate for Europe but keep selling the old version everywhere else. The assumption seems to be that only European and North American consumers matter enough to protect. I'm a food safety analyst in Dublin, and an American snack company sent me samples of Tostitos salsa con queso dip last spring, asking about distribution potential. The color was unnaturally bright, so I checked the label and found yellow 5 and yellow 6. Both require warning labels here stating they may cause hyperactivity in children. I emailed them explaining that while we don't ban those dyes outright, the mandatory warning makes them commercially unviable because parents avoid them. The rep emailed back saying the bright color is part of the brand identity and that removing the dyes would make it look unappetizing. Replied that we consider nerve development more important than aesthetic appeal. She said American parents don't seem to mind and that kids love the vibrant color. I told her Irish parents do mind and would rather have duller cheese dip than hyperactive children. She asked if we'd accept it without the warning label since the concentration was low. I said no, regulations are regulations. She sent me a competitor analysis showing other countries accept it without warnings. I responded that we're not other countries. She asked what it would take to get approval. I said reformulate without the dyes or accept the warning label. She stopped replying. 2 months later, I saw the same company launched a natural line in the UK using paprika and annatto for color. They could have done that from the start, but only bothered when forced to. It's frustrating watching American companies treat food safety. It's like a negotiation instead of a responsibility. I work quality control for a Japanese restaurant chain. And last year, an American chicken supplier offered us a bulk deal on frozen breasts. The price was half what we pay locally, so I asked about processing methods. The rep said they use a chemical rinse to kill bacteria, mostly peracetic acid now, instead of chlorine. I asked why they needed chemical rinses at all. He said it's standard practice in the US to compensate for high-volume processing. I told him we don't allow chemically treated poultry in Japan. He seemed surprised and said the chemical rinses are FDA approved and more effective than Japanese methods. I explained that our system focuses on hygiene throughout production rather than chemical fixes at the end. He insisted their chicken was just as safe and that banning chemical treatments was protectionist policy disguised as food safety. I said if that were true, we'd also ban domestic chicken treated the same way. But we don't need to, because our producers don't use chemical rinses. He changed tactics and said they could provide chlorine-free certification. I told him any chemical antimicrobial treatment disqualifies the product. He asked how Japanese consumers would even know the difference. I said they wouldn't, which is exactly why we regulated at the import level. He left frustrated. I got an email a week later with a lower price quote, as if cost was the issue. It wasn't about money. It was about not serving our customers chicken that needed a chemical bath to be considered safe. The assumption that everyone wants cheap food over safe food is very American. I'm a food truck operator in Copenhagen, and I met an American vendor at a street food festival last summer who couldn't understand why none of the local vendors would trade snacks with him. He had a cooler full of Little Debbie Swiss rolls and kept offering them around. I finally explained they contain yellow, 5 yellow 6, and red 40. All restricted here because of links to allergies and behavioral issues in kids. He looked at me like I was speaking another language and said, "They're just snack cakes. I grew up eating these." I told him that's part of the problem. He got defensive and said if they were really dangerous, the US wouldn't let kids eat them. I asked if he'd looked at American childhood obesity and ADHD rates compared to Denmark's. He said that was due to screen time and parenting, not food. I pointed out that European kids also have screens but lower rates of both issues. He insisted correlation wasn't causation, and that plenty of healthy American kids eat Swiss rolls. I said plenty of Danish kids are healthy, specifically because they don't. Called me paranoid and said Europeans overregulate everything. I replied that Americans underregulate everything and call it freedom. He packed up his cooler and moved to another part of the festival. I saw him later trying to explain to a Swedish vendor why Gatorade is basically just sports water. The Swedish guy was reading the ingredient list, looking increasingly concerned. I don't think he made any trades that day. He probably went home thinking Europeans are weird about food. We went home thinking Americans are weird about chemicals. I manage a corner shop in Edinburgh. Last November, an American exchange student asked why we don't carry Ritz crackers. I told her they contain partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil, which is a trans fat band here. She said, but they're crackers. They're not even sweet. I explained trans fats aren't about sugar. They're about the type of oil used for texture and shelf life. She said she'd been eating them her whole life and felt fine. I said plenty of people smoke for years and feel fine until they don't. She frowned and said that was a dramatic comparison. I pulled up our import restriction list and showed her that Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Iceland, Norway, and Denmark all ban the same ingredient. She scrolled through it silently, then asked why America allows it if so many countries don't. I said American food regulations prioritize industry convenience over consumer health. She looked genuinely upset and asked what else she'd been eating that was banned here. I suggested she compare ingredient labels between American and British versions of the same products. She came back 2 days later and said she'd looked up Kraft Dinner and found the Canadian version doesn't have the same dyes as the American one. She wanted to know why one country gets the safe version and another doesn't. I told her to ask Kraft, not me. She said she was going to start reading every label from now on. I said, that's what we all should be doing. She bought a pack of Scottish oatcakes instead and said they tasted plain but honest. I told her that's the idea. I'm a flight attendant on the Auckland to Lax route, and a few months back, an American passenger complained that our in-flight snacks were boring compared to what U.S. airlines serve. She specifically wanted Skittles or M&Ms. I explained, we don't stock American candy because it contains additives banned in New Zealand. She said, it's just candy. What's banned about it? I listed titanium dioxide in Skittles and artificial dyes in M&Ms. She laughed and said, you're joking. I eat those all the time. Told her that doesn't make them safe, just available. She said if they were really dangerous, they'd be banned in America too. I replied that America bans very little when it comes to food additives. She got annoyed and said I was exaggerating to make American food sound bad. I offered her a Tim Tam instead. She refused and said it was ridiculous that a flight to America didn't have American snacks. One suggested she buy some at Lax duty-free. She muttered something about nanny state regulations and asked for pretzels. We had pretzels. She ate 3 bags and said they tasted plain. I didn't mention that plain is what happens when you don't add petroleum-based dyes and industrial preservatives. She spent the rest of the flight reading a magazine about clean eating and didn't see the irony. I've worked this route for 6 years, and Americans always have the same reaction when they learn their favorite foods are banned elsewhere. It's never maybe, we should check our regulations. It's always everyone else is being paranoid. The disconnect is wild. I work at a university cafeteria in Utrecht, and we had an American study abroad student lodge a formal complaint last semester because we don't serve ranch dressing. She said it was discriminatory to not accommodate American food preferences. I explained, we don't carry it because most American ranch contains BHA and BHT, preservatives banned in several EU countries for potential cancer risks. She said, it's salad dressing, not poison. I told her the line between the two is thinner than she thinks. She insisted she'd been eating ranch her entire life with no issues. I said long-term exposure takes time to show effects. She asked why America would approve something carcinogenic. I said America approves a lot of things Europe doesn't, and we'd rather err on the side of caution. She argued that European food was bland and that Americans needed familiar options. I offered her olive oil and balsamic vinegar. She made a face and said that wasn't the same. I agreed. It's not the same because it doesn't contain synthetic antioxidants linked to organ damage in animal studies. She said I was being dramatic and that she just wanted normal salad dressing. I told her this is normal here. She asked if there was anywhere in the city that sold American ranch. I said maybe the import shop near the train station, but it'd be expensive and probably reformulated for EU standards anyway. She left frustrated. I saw her 2 weeks later, eating salad with olive oil. I didn't say anything. Sometimes people adjust. Sometimes they just run out of options. I'm a customs officer in Sydney. Yesterday, an American retiree tried to bring in a suitcase full of hamburger helper, Kraft singles, and instant mashed potatoes for his daughter who'd moved here. He said she missed real American food. I told him none of it would clear inspection because of various banned preservatives and additives. He looked devastated and said, but it's not drugs, it's groceries. I explained that just because something's sold in America doesn't mean it's legal here. He asked what was wrong with mac and cheese. I said nothing's wrong with mac and cheese. but the artificial dyes and preservatives in the American version don't meet our standards.